This is the story about an unsinkable ship that ended up at the bottom of the Atlantic. It inspired the greatest movie ever made about one of the worst tragedies the world has ever seen. So how did they make this epic film? And was the iceberg the real reason it sank? Let's find out. Welcome to Explained. The RMS Titanic was the ship of dreams. It was built for luxury travel between Europe and North America and cost a whopping $7.5 million at the time. That's the equivalent of $200 million or more today. It was also one of the largest cruise liners of its time, measuring 28.2 meters in width, 53 meters in height, and 269 meters in length. To put that into perspective, that's almost as long as 3 football fields and as tall as a 17-story building. On April 14, 1912, 4 days after it left Southampton for New York, tragedy struck. The Titanic hit an iceberg. From the 2,240 people on board, only 866 survived, while the others drowned in the icy Atlantic. This tragedy is surrounded by controversy because the ship was said to be unsinkable. So was the iceberg the only reason the Titanic ended up at the bottom of the ocean? And how factual is the movie? Let's look at 6 mistakes that sank the Titanic to start with. Number 1, the design. The Titanic had new safety features like 16 compartments that were designed to prevent the hull from flooding in an emergency. And its sister ship, the Olympic, was designed with similar safety features. Just 7 months before the Titanic set sail, the Olympic suffered a collision with a Royal Naval warship that was racing alongside it. And despite the massive hole it left in the ship's side, the Olympic survived.
I think the spectacular survival of the Olympic from the Hawk collision planted a dangerous idea in people's minds.
If a warship can take you on and you can just sail home again and get fixed, then it's giving people the wrong idea.
So people naturally believed the Titanic was unsinkable too. Number 2, lifeboats. The confidence in the ship's safety features led them to focus more on the ship's looks, so to make it look more spacious, the number of lifeboats were cut down from 64 required for an emergency to just 20. Number 3, fire on board. A fire broke out in the co-bunker in Boiler Room 5. It actually started in Belfast before it had even arrived in Southampton. The bunker's steel rear wall was part of a watertight bulkhead designed to stop the Titanic from flooding if it got a hole in the hull. But since the bunker was burning for days before it was properly put out, the rear wall was weakened. Moreover, the bulkheads weren't tall enough to reach the passenger deck level. So once water spilt over them, there was no stopping the flooding. Number 4, the captain. Messages from other ships warning of icebergs were sent to Captain Smith throughout the day. But he decided to keep the Titanic on course for a little longer before turning west towards New York. At 9:52 p.m., the Titanic received another ice warning from a ship heading to New York a few hours ahead of it, and an hour later, an even more urgent warning of an ice field came from the Californian just 10 miles ahead. But this last alert was never sent to Captain Smith. Number 5, binoculars. Believe it or not, the 2 lookouts on the ship's crow's nest didn't even have binoculars with them. To add to it, the still cold waters the Titanic was passing through, coupled with the difference in air temperature, created an optical illusion called a miraging haze.
If you look at this glass of water here, as the pencil is behind it, what you can start to see is the different shapes that are being made. And that's simply because light is bending according to the density of the water behind it. And this was the same the night the Titanic sank, because the air was different densities and therefore the light was bending. Everyone has heard of a desert mirage. Well, this actually created what we call a miraging haze at the horizon behind the iceberg. So in effect, the haze on the distant horizon actually camouflaged the iceberg in the near ground.
Once the ship hit the iceberg, it ripped holes into its side below the waterline and it began to take on water. Number 6, safety drills. It's almost hard to believe, but the ship had no safety drills in place in case of an emergency. So passengers didn't know where to go, what to do, or which lifeboats to board. And the crew never ensured the lifeboats were filled to their capacity. And because of that, hundreds of lives were tragically lost. This is what one of the survivors, Frank Prentice, had to say about that night in a BBC interview.
It was chaotic in the end. Everybody was crying and praying and trying to get into the very few lifeboats that were left. It was very sad. Sometimes I think a lot about it.
When asked if he thought he was gonna die, he said,
I didn't give it a second thought when I was on the ship or when I dropped into the water. But I gave it a long thought when I was on my own. And everyone else seemed to be dead around me. That's when I thought I was going to die.
Now here's a little fun fact. The very first movie about the tragedy was actually saved from the Titanic. It was only 10 minutes long and it came out 4 weeks after it sank. But James Cameron's 1997 blockbuster is the one that's lived on for decades. Making a movie about the world's worst tragedy at sea was no easy task. So Cameron decided on a hybrid approach and used practical effects mixed with digital effects to tell the story. First off, they built a life-size replica of the Titanic that was 236.2 meters long. That's almost as big as the actual ship. It was built in a tank that held 17 million gallons of water at a specially constructed facility at Fox Studios in Baja, Mexico. And all this cost a whopping $40 million. In fact, this film set was so large, people kept getting lost on board. Cameron's team also had to factor in the filming of the sinking scene during the construction phase of the ship. They knew they couldn't sink the entire thing at once. So while building the replica, they had small portions from the middle section and the bow removed. This gave them the flexibility to angle certain sections while filming.
Single stocks can be volatile. A portfolio of stocks, on the other hand, carries relatively less risk as the risk is diversified across multiple stocks. Find diversified stock portfolios on Smallcase. Download the app now. Investment and securities market are subject to market risk. Read all the related documents carefully before investing.
Acidity. सीट मिले या ना मिले, एसिडिटी से राहत मिल जाएगी। एसिडिटी कहीं भी हो, डाइजीन इंस्टा ऑन द गो।
The far end of the set, but see, I want to keep some sense of a beach up there. Let's drop the far end of the set like 4 or 5 inches.
So how did they actually film the sinking of the Titanic? To sell the illusion, they had to make the ship's angle in the water look dramatic. The ship they built could only be angled at 6 degrees. To tilt it further, they used a camera technique called a Dutch angle and corrected the waterline with CGI. Additionally, the excluded sections of the ship allowed them to drop the front more into the water when needed, and the rear of the ship could detach and tilt 90 degrees. Next key elements were the stunt performers. To show a highly populated, chaotic deck, 100 stuntmen and women were hired. Some of them wore special vests fitted with wheels. This let them safely roll down the deck, but on camera, it looked like they were falling with the angle of the ship. Additionally, hundreds of other extras were hired and fastened to the railings and fixed objects so it looked like they were clinging on for dear life. They also had a number of rubber props installed to avoid real injuries. So as they were falling, you can literally see the rubber props cushioning their fall. A number of miniature ships were also built, and these were used to shoot scenes like the cracking of the deck and the dropping of the ship in the water. This trick photography, combined with shots of hundreds of people splashing around in the water, created the most dramatic last moments. Before we wrap up, let's take a quick look at how many of these characters were on board the real Titanic. Number 1, Jack Dawson. He was a fictional character, but there was actually a Joseph Dawson on board who was part of the ship's crew, and that turned out to be a pure coincidence. Number 2, Rose. She was also a fictional character, but she was based on an American artist named Beatrice Wood that Cameron was reading about in a book. And fun fact, the hand-sketching image in the film is actually James Cameron's hand. Number 3, Margaret Brown. She was real. Margaret was an American socialite and philanthropist who was on board the ship. She really did help passengers into lifeboats before getting on one herself, and accounts show that she did insist on sending lifeboats back to save more people. Number 4, the elderly couple. They were real too. It was Macy's owner Isidore Strauss and his wife Ida. Isidore refused to board the lifeboats till all the women and children were safe, and his wife Ida refused to leave him behind. Do you know any other interesting facts about the real Titanic versus how they showed it in the movie?